Welcome back to part 3 of our interview with Matt Bodnar, where he tells us why poker is full of business lessons and why meditating every day will make you a more well-rounded person. Keep it right here because part 3 is just around the corner.
Welcome to this edition of Peak Performers Podcast
with your host, Thor Conklin.
Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
Thor Conklin here. We give you the tricks, the tips, the tools, the strategy, the technology, and the psychology peak performers use in order to get more done and execute at the highest level. If you know what to do but struggle with getting it all done, or simply want to raise your game to the next level, this podcast is for you. Sit back and enjoy. I know that you are a big poker player. What have you learned playing poker that you can apply in business?
Yeah, I'm a huge poker player. Love playing poker. I'm a very big fan. I was out in Vegas playing the World Series earlier this year. And to me, poker has taught me a lot about business and about life. And the two biggest lessons, I think, one is I think poker is a wonderful crucible for teaching you how to be rational and objective, because poker doesn't care about your ego. Poker will brutalize you if your ego gets in the way of your decision making and your playing. And the game is so pure from that standpoint that it's 100% results oriented, and your own feelings and ego and emotions don't matter at all unless they're sabotaging you. And so you learn real quickly that if you have an emotional problem where your ego is getting in the way, you have to be able to check that. You have to be self-aware. You have to be able to tune in and figure out, hey, like my ego is getting in the way of this, or I'm not accepting this particular part of the situation, or I was ahead, but now I'm behind and I have to go ahead and give up this hand, or all of these pieces. The whole idea of what I call accepting reality, which is basically trying to find what is true as opposed to trying to find what you would like to be true, or, accepting what is true about a situation instead of denying it and insisting that what you wish was true was true. And poker is an incredible crucible for teaching you that skill if you're able to sustain yourself in the game, because it's going to just demolish you until you learn that really, really clearly. And it's such a powerful feedback mechanism for kind of cutting up and thinking about your own emotions and thought processes, and what they call in the poker world going on tilt, which is basically like letting your emotions cause you to make bad plays. All of those pieces of the puzzle was really, really powerful. And so that's one of the major lessons for me from poker, is how to think about, objectively assess myself, my skills, what's going on, and take stock so that I could make the best possible decision. And I think that's critical, in life in general. I think self-awareness is one of the fundamental pillars of achievement. And I think lack of self-awareness is one of the single biggest things that holds entrepreneurs back and holds people back from achieving their goals. So to me, the ability to really cultivate self-awareness is a huge component of poker and the psychology of success more broadly. And the second concept that, especially being an investor, I've gotten tremendous value from is the notion of expected value, which is basically, and more broadly, the idea of evaluating decisions instead of outcomes. And so in the poker world, and without getting too crazy into like the math and the numbers, basically the idea is if you make a decision that's mathematically correct, right? And in the poker parlance, that would typically be called a decision with a positive expected value, i.e. the value of your action is worth more, or like the value of the amount you're risking is not as much as the value you would receive if you won, essentially. And we could get more to the math, but that's in a podcast, that's kind of the nutshell of it.
Yep.
The notion of positive expected value basically says if you make a positive EV decision, right, which is or a plus EV decision is like the parlance in the poker world, then it doesn't matter what the outcome is, you made the correct decision, right? So if I go all in and I'm 80% to win, and the 20% to chance hits and I lose, it doesn't matter that I lost a hand or that I lost the pot. I made the correct decision because on a chip weighted basis, 80% of the time I'm winning the whole pot and 20% of the time I'm losing it. Yep. So I made the pot times 0.8 is basically like the expected value of my bet. And so the idea that you should think rationally about the weighted probabilities of the outcomes that you're evaluating and assign values to them and determine and try to sort of choose the path that has the highest expected value, and then disconnect yourself from the result and really focus only on the decision-making process and refining and honing that decision-making process, which is also something, if you study the great investors, people like Warren Buffett or Ray Dalio or Howard Marks, or a lot of the really successful value investors especially, they talk about a very similar strategy, which is, essentially invest with a positive EV, invest with a margin of safety, invest in stuff where it's fundamentally worth more than the what you're buying the stock for. And so those two concepts really were both incredibly powerful mental models that I was able to pull from playing poker.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm a blackjack player. I don't count cards, unfortunately. But it's just, it's quite frankly, a very boring game to me because it's just the math. It's, if you have this, they have that, you do this. That's it. It's just black and white.
Poker or blackjack?
Blackjack.
Okay, yeah. I was going to say.
No.
Poker is like, the math is huge, and the math, you got to have the math. But then once you have the math, then it comes about, the person.
Yeah. You take the emotional piece out of it. And poker, as in business, you're out of business when you run out of cash, and you're out of a game when you run out of cash. So in that respect, they're identical. You're still alive if you have some cash left. As soon as you lose your cash, you're done.
Exactly, and that's you see a lot of poker players that in poker parlance they call that bankroll management, which is basically never risk more than a certain percentage of your bankroll, depending on kind of what game you're playing. And it's you'll see a lot of players that violate the sort of math of bankroll management, which is essentially statistics 101 and thinking about probability distributions and bell curves, and they go bust, right? Because they risked too much of their bankroll in a given situation and end up paying for it with their careers.
Yep, absolutely. Important daily habits. What are they?
I'm a huge proponent of building a daily architecture around cultivating my own kind of, for lack of a better term, sort of creative output. And by that, I don't just mean creative output like creative writing or drawing or art or whatever. I mean sort of a much richer sense of high value, proactive work on whether it's my business or my life or myself, doing those kind of things that let you step back, look at yourself, look at your world from a sort of a 30,000 foot view and figure out, okay, what are the high leverage activities that I should be focusing on? What's the noise and what are the distractions, right? Performing things like 80-20 analysis on my time and my investments and my money, and figuring out where can I spend more time? Where am I wasting time? Journaling, thinking about the highest value activities that I can participate in. And there's the old grid of sort of urgent versus important, right? And the activities that are important but not urgent in that grid, those are often the most high leverage, the most high value activities that you can participate in. And so my day is structured all around cultivating as much time as possible every single day to be in that proactive, creative, productive space, and not in kind of a reactive space where I'm dealing with emails and phone calls and meetings and all of these other pieces of the puzzle. So the way that actually plays out in my day is that I typically try to structure my mornings as that, or at least a big chunk of my mornings as that kind of peak productivity time. And that's based on my own biorhythms, and when I find I'm the most productive is typically in the morning. So I like to carve my mornings for really thinking, reflecting, journaling, and working on what I, kind of key projects. And so what I'll start with, my daily architecture actually starts the night before, and and really starts on Sunday of every week. What I'll do is I'll set out what I call a most important task, which is a very common, productivity hack. I'll set out a most important task, maybe one or two at most, usually just one for every day of the week. And I'll look at every Sunday, I'll review kind of in a GTD fashion, everything that happened in the prior week, everything that's going on the next week. What are my kind of medium-term goals? What's going on? And figure out basically what are the 3 to 5 things I want to accomplish that week that I can make the biggest impact on my goals overall by doing these key things. And I'll set those up as most important tasks, and I'll basically set myself one most important task every single day of the week. And my goal is essentially, so that's on Sunday. Then at the end of the day, so let's say I get up the next morning, right? typically what I'll do is I'll get up, meditate, and I'm a big fan of meditation. Started meditating probably 4 years ago at this point. One of the most research validated things that you can do. Tremendous amount of research on meditation being incredible for you in pretty much every way. Sleep is also one of the things that's one of the most research validated hacks for productivity and health, is just sleep more and stop cutting out sleep. And so I try to sleep 7 or 8 hours every night. I'll get up the next morning, meditate, and then before I get kind of sucked into the whirlwind of email, of all of this external noise kind of pounding me and telling me to do X, Y, or Z, I'll try to set aside like an hour or two, or even just like 30 or 45 minutes to crush out and execute that MIT first thing in the morning. And that MIT can be anything from journaling about like a key problem or topic that I've had that I've been trying to think through, or it can be, like executing on a specific piece of a project, building a financial model, kind of whatever I think the biggest, most high value thing I can do for that day is. And if I've just accomplished that in the morning, I basically consider my day a success. Everything else that happens from there on is just gravy on top of the day. So if I get more done, if I do more key things, it's just even better. But if that's all I get done, and then I get completely distracted and sucked into email and all these other things, I consider it a win if I accomplish one MIT per day. Basically, I try to cultivate my mornings broadly to have a lot of that kind of free, unstructured time to think, journal, write, and execute on big, important tasks. From there, I set up my meetings. Basically, all of my meetings are in the afternoon. So from noon till 5 or 6 p.m. will be meetings with everything from key staff members to teammates, people, grabbing coffee with people, etc. I try to do that all in the afternoon. And then at the end of the day, what I'll typically set out is kind of a question or challenge or problem that I'm dealing with, and just think about, what's like some major obstacle that I have or something I'm wrestling with. It's like, I don't know what to do about this. Like, I'll just kind of write that out or set an intention that's like, I need to figure out a solution for, this problem. And then I'll completely let go of it. And I'll spend the evening with my wife or with some friends getting dinner or whatever, and sleep on it, come back the next morning, meditate, and then a lot of times, one of the MITs or an MIT for that day could be just to spend like 20 minutes journaling on that particular problem. And when you do that, you're actually harnessing a bunch of neuroscience research around the neuroscience of creativity, which says essentially it's called creative incubation. And it's very research backed. It's something that a lot of psychologists and neuroscientists write about. And it's the same kind of thing that you tap into when if you've really been struggling with something, whether you're trying to build something and you can't quite get it to work, or you're playing a video game and you can't quite get through this one piece, and then you go have lunch or whatever, and you come back and you immediately fix it. You immediately figure out what the problem was and get it working. What happens is when your conscious mind shifts away from something, your subconscious starts working on it. Right. And your subconscious is this vast, deep network of processing power that you can only tap by consciously feeding information into the subconscious and then letting go and focusing on something else and kind of relaxing. And so what I try to do is feed information to my subconscious at the end of the day, and then spend some quality time relaxing and focusing on other things, get good sleep, meditate to really prime my mind so that when I come back to those challenges, I can tap into the vast wealth of knowledge and information that my subconscious has processed and recombined and thought about, and bring kind of new and novel and creative insights to whatever challenges I'm dealing with.
Yeah, your system is very similar to what I follow. Questions are a real big key to my week. Asking great questions. I believe that questions are the answer.
It's so important.
Absolutely. Man, like an hour just flew by, but I want to make sure that we touch a little bit on your podcast. Tell us a little bit about the podcast, and tell us one or two things that you've learned, the science of success, either from one of your guests on the show. What was one of those aha moments or interesting facts that you learned?
So yeah, the show is called The Science of Success. It's all about evidence-based personal growth, which is something that I'm obsessed with, which is this idea of, I've kind of said a little bit and peppered in through here talking about like neuroscience and research and all this stuff. I'm obsessed with the idea of like, what does the data say about how we can be more productive and how we can achieve, the results we want to achieve? And that spun out of my kind of obsession with super successful people and trying to break down and figure out if, again, coming back to the same idea that we talked about that I figured out in high school, which is basically if I truly fundamentally believe if one person can do it, another can do it, right? It's kind of goes back to that idea of, oh my gosh, I love this scene. It's the movie with Anthony Hopkins and Alec Baldwin. And they're like in the wild, their plane crashes. I forget the name of it, but there's like the scene where the two of them are trying to kill a bear, and they keep chanting. They're like, "What one man can do, another can do. What one man can do, another can do." It's like if you watch it, you'll get like really hyped up. But you can find it on YouTube. But anyway, so like that fundamental idea, breaking that down, getting the data, getting the science, is why I created the show. And we interview all kinds of people. We interview, like neuroscientists, psychologists, people like Robert Cialdini, Carol Dweck, Jeff Colvin, a lot of writers, researchers, thinkers, all that kind of stuff. And to me, like some of the recurrent themes or some of the things that we see again and again on the show, one of probably the single most prominent theme that I get all of the time from people, everybody from FBI hostage negotiators to astronauts, literally, is this idea that self-awareness is the cornerstone of growth. If you're not honest with yourself about where you are and what your current abilities are and what your current limitations are, it's nearly impossible for you to move forward. And without cultivating that self-awareness of your own emotions, of your own emotional state, of your own challenges, setbacks, problems, issues, you're really setting yourself up for failure. And so much self-sabotage comes from an inability to acknowledge or recognize, or an unwillingness from an ego standpoint to acknowledge or recognize what your own limitations and weaknesses are. And the sooner you can take responsibility and accept all of the things that are holding you back, ironically, the sooner that you can overcome them. But if you refuse to accept them, refuse to believe them, you just get caught in a cycle of behavior where you keep repeating the same mistake over and over and over again until the world kind of beats it into your head that's like, hey, maybe you should learn this. When you flip that and start cultivating a deep self-criticism and introspection of like, I want to know and I want feedback on all the stuff that I'm not good at so that I can get better at it. And that's when we talk about earlier in the conversation about the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, that whole concept that from that book is basically the idea that the sooner you can shift from a focus of proving how great you are to a focus on improving and realizing that feedback is a critical component of that. Self-criticism, understanding your own weaknesses, all of those components are essential to achieving your goals. And the sooner you start cultivating those and start cultivating kind of a radical acceptance of your own challenges and limitations, the sooner you will overcome them. But the more that you get caught up in denying that they exist, you trap yourself into a self-reinforcing cycle of repeating the same failures over and over again.
And so often this is the biggest blind spot for people. How does one go about finding out what this self-awareness, how do they do it? Is it by bringing on a coach or a consultant or someone to work with them? Is it going through some sort of process of asking questions? How do they arrive at this?
I think the simplest, and there's a lot of ways you can do it. I think a coach is a great way. I think the simplest and easiest, and as we touched on briefly earlier, the most research validated way to do it is meditation. Right? Meditation creates an awareness of what's going on with your thoughts. It creates presence in the present moment and grounds you more in what's actually happening. And so over time, meditation lets you kind of key into the biases and mental addictions that are in your mind that are ping-ponging around and shaping your reality, so that you can say, hey, hold on, like what was that thought that just flitted through my mind about this? Like maybe that's not a productive, maybe that's not a productive way that I could think about this, or maybe that's a limitation that I didn't realize that I had before, or maybe this is something about myself that I really need to think about and get some feedback on. And so to me, there's lots of paths towards self-awareness, but the simplest and easiest starting point is meditation. That's a thousands of year old ancient tradition that neuroscience, psychologists, all kinds of stuff have validated again and again and again as an incredibly impactful strategy that really simply and easily can start to build the muscle of self-awareness. And I'll throw one other little tidbit in, which is a lot of people start with meditation and then give it up because it seems hard or difficult or they can't focus their mind. Meditation is not the act of focusing your mind. It's the act of returning your mind to whatever it was focused on. You're naturally going to wander And by constantly returning your focus back to the breath or back to whatever the kind of center point of your attention is, when the mind does wander, that is exactly the muscle that you're cultivating that gives you the self-awareness to be able to understand and see your own limiting beliefs, cognitive biases, etc.
Yeah, and it builds over time. It gets stronger over time, and it stacks on itself.
Exactly.
Well, head on over to The Science of Success. Check out the episodes. Matt, we're at the end of this episode, so tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you.
The easiest way to get in touch with me, you can just go to successpodcast.com. That's where the show is. I've got my contact information on there. You can reach out and say hi.
Terrific. Any parting advice for the listeners?
I would say do something this week to cultivate your self-awareness in some way.
I love it. Call to action. Matt, thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to having you back on the show.
Thor, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation, and it's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening today. I really do appreciate your time, and I hope you found today's show valuable. If you would like to receive these shows automatically to your phone or to your computer, simply go to iTunes and subscribe. After listening to several of the shows, if you're so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating, as this helps us reach additional people and spread the message. If you're truly committed to taking your life to the next level and doing whatever it takes to become a peak performer, but something's holding you back, something is blocking your way, and you just can't seem to figure out what it is, send me an email to info@thorconklin.com, and I'd be more than happy to get on the phone with you. We'll schedule a 15-minute discovery call. No obligation, no cost. I absolutely love to hear from the listeners, and if there's something I can do to help, I'd be more than happy to do that. Also, if you found something of great interest in today's show and you want to share that with your friends and family, simply go to my Facebook page, Thor Conklin, click on the episode, hit the share button, and share it on your page. You can follow me at Twitter at Thor Conklin. The website is thorconklin.com. We're constantly adding new free resources, discussing additional tricks, tips, tools, and strategies on how to be a peak performer. Remember, I try to keep these episodes short so you can listen to them during dot time, doing other things, commuting, driving, walking, working out. Decide to be a peak performer in all that you do. And until tomorrow, have an absolutely amazing day.